welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be diving into the 3 new face palettes from Anastasia Beverly Hills. I did go ahead and buy all 3. I felt like I just couldn't leave anybody out. I couldn't in my review. I wanted everyone to be able to see what these shades are and see if they will work for your skin tone. And I had to buy all 3. I didn't need all 3. I will definitely have friends and family that I can gift them to. Instead of buying the palette that I felt like would work best for me, I decided to get all 3. I mean, my job is to review makeup. We're gonna dive into these. These retail for $58 each. You do get quite a bit of product. You actually get 17.6 grams worth of product. You get 0.62 ounces worth of product. So there is quite a bit of product here in these pans. So you get 8 grams worth of product in the bronzer and 4.8 grams in the highlighter and 4.8 grams in the blush. And it also says that they are made in the USA. So just FYI. They are cruelty-free and the shelf life is 24 months. First up, we have the Italian Summer. This is for fair to light skin. And I have a lot to say about that. I will get into all of that in my final thoughts. I will kind of break it all down. But this is the Italian Summer. And then we have the Off to Costa Rica. This is for medium to tan skin. And then finally we have the Tropical Getaway. And this is for deep skin. Of course, I will swatch all 3 of these palettes next to a bunch of different bronzers, blushes, highlights that I have in my collection. If you're new to my channel and you're curious about my skin tone, I will leave a list of popular foundations out on the market and what shades I wear in those foundations in the description box down below. But I am described as like a medium to tan with a golden undertone. So that's pretty much how I buy my foundations. Lots to say about these palettes, and we're gonna go ahead and jump into the application. I do not apply this palette on my skin because it is a little bit too dark for me, but I do apply this palette, which is the medium to tan palette. This is Off to Costa Rica. And then I apply the Italian Summer, which is for fair to light skin. We're gonna get into all of it, you guys. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the application. Then we'll get into the swatches and lots of the comparisons that I have. And then we will jump into my final thoughts. So I will see you guys then. Okay, so let's jump into playing with these 3 new palettes. This is the first, so this is the Italian Summer palette. This is the lightest palette of the 3. And I was actually thinking that this would be too light, but this might actually work for me. This bronzer is actually darker than I thought it was going to be in the pan, but that doesn't always mean that it's going to be that dark on the skin. Sometimes it can be very deceiving when you look down into the pan versus what it actually looks like on the skin. It looks to be pretty pigmented. That's the bronzer. Very smooth texture. This is the bronzer of the medium palette. And then this is the bronzer of the deep. So, I mean, I think I could possibly make these 2 work. There's not a lot of differences between these 2. I mean, as you're seeing, they're not that different on the skin. Not that much difference, to be honest. So let's just go ahead and apply this. I'm just going to take the Rougher number 5 brush and let's go into the light palette. I'm going to grab the bronzer. Tap off because I don't know how much pigment is going to come off on the brush. So I like to go in lightly and tap off, and then if I need to build it, I can. But this definitely has pigment. And it seems to be very buildable and a very smooth type of texture. I have a dry patch right here, so I'm trying to be careful so that I don't put too much bronzer on it so that it doesn't grab it. You can see I have a dry patch right here. But this blends really beautifully. It's a very, very soft, buttery bronzer. Let's go ahead and go into the blush. It has just a little bit of radiance in it, and it's very pretty. It's a very pretty blush. I'm excited to try it. Okay, I'm going to tap off and let's place that right here. Now I am going to powder. So sometimes I go in a little bit heavier because I am going to go over it with powder and kind of blend it all together. But that blush is really pretty. Now let's go into the highlighter. So I'm going to grab the highlighter right here. Now that highlighter has a very pretty like golden shimmer to it. You can see those dry patches. Very pretty highlighter, very pretty texture. Okay, let's go into the Off to Costa Rica palette, and I'm gonna grab the bronzer. Okay, this bronzer, you guys, is so buttery. Like, it is super buttery and very buildable and just really pretty. It really is a pretty, it is a pretty bronzer. And I'll be honest with you, I don't see a difference between the two bronzers. The bronzers, in my opinion, apply the same. They look the same on the skin. I mean, I'm curious to see how they look in swatches and how they actually compare to other bronzers. But the shade, in my opinion, looks very similar. Like, I don't feel like I've applied two different bronzers on the face. Blush brush clean. Let's go into the blush in this palette. Tap off because I don't want it to be too heavy. Honestly, there's not a lot of differences between the two blushes either. I'm not seeing a big difference between them. So let's go into the highlighter, which this does seem to be a little bit more of a bronzy gold. So this highlighter is definitely a little bit more bronzy than this highlighter. So this is the highlighter in the lighter palette. This is the highlighter in the medium palette. And then this is the highlighter in the deep palette. And personally, for my skin tone, I could wear these two. I think this one might be a tad bit too gold for me because it's so bright. This one is a little bit more, I'm wearing highlight, whereas this one is just like a hint of something on the skin where you almost can't see it, where it kind of blends into my skin. So I can wear both. It just depends on what look I'm going for. Okay, so I am back. I went ahead and kept everything kind of light today. I went ahead and used the lighter palette on the eyes. So I used the bronzer in the crease, threw on the blush on the lid, and then went ahead and put the highlighter a little tiny bit on the inner corner. For my lippy, I kind of mixed two of them. I know, I'm a little extra. But this is from YSL. This is a new one I've bought. This is their lip shines that they have. This is the shade number 12. It's so pretty. But I wanted to throw this on top of it. This is from Chantecaille. I'm just being extra. You don't need to do this, but I just kind of mix them together and, you know, I'm just being extra. It is what it is. I just love these two new lippies and I couldn't decide which one to do. So I thought, well, I'll just put them both on. Just very easy, simple makeup look. Nothing too fancy. Just throw on some mascara. So that's it for the application of the palettes. Let's go ahead and jump into the swatches and comparisons. I will definitely be swatching these next to a bunch of different bronzers, blushes, and highlights that I have in my collection. And then, of course, we will jump into my final thoughts. So I will see you guys then. Okay, so now that we've made it through the swatches and comparisons, let me go ahead and get into my final thoughts. By the way, I hope that those swatches were helpful for you. I have one word to describe these palettes. Confused. I am so confused. I'm so confused by the color selections that they chose to put in these palettes. Number one, as you guys saw in the swatches, the bronzers on all three of the palettes are very close in shade. The only difference is the tone. What's even more bizarre is this shade, which is Italian Summer. It looks lighter in the pan compared to the medium palette. But they're basically the same color except for the tone. The tone's a little bit different, but like sometimes when I was swatching, this would swatch a little bit darker than the bronzer that's in the medium palette. So I'm kind of confused by the bronzers that they chose for these palettes. The bronzer that they chose for the deep palette, you guys, this is not that deep. This is a darker bronzer, but it's only gonna work for a darker complexion. This is not gonna work for a deep complexion. So this palette, which is called the Tropical Getaway, this one is described and created for a deeper complexion, but it's not gonna work for very many deep complexions. I feel like this is gonna work for a darker complexion, but not a deep. And here's my thing though, because it's like a little bit more on the cool tone side, a lot of people might run the risk of it being a little bit ashy on a deeper complexion. Now, in my opinion, the blush should never be darker than the bronzer, and that kind of threw me off in the first place, like when I first saw the images. But I will say, it seems like the blush is, the blush would probably add a little bit of warmth to the bronzer. I didn't choose the right color combinations for these palettes, in my opinion. I just did not feel like there was enough differences between all three of the bronzers to be classified for fair to light, medium to tan, and deep skin tones. It just doesn't all make sense to me. The bronzers are so similar in shade, all three of them. Even though this bronzer is a little bit more neutral, leaning cool tone, I can still make it work. And the blush and the highlight, in my opinion, look a little bit better on my skin tone. Bronzer in the Italian Summer, which is in the Fair to Light palette, it is a little bit darker in tone than the palette for the medium to tan skin. So that tells me those who have fair to light skin, you're going to have to use this very, very carefully, especially if you have a fair skin tone. This bronzer might be too dark. You could probably go in with it a little bit lighter handed. And what's interesting to me is the bronzer in the Fair to Light palette and the bronzer in the medium palette are even darker than some of the other bronzers that I have in my collection, but yet the bronzer in the deep palette isn't dark enough for those with a deep complexion. But I'm just so confused by the shades that they chose for the bronzers in all three of these palettes. I feel like in development, in brand development, if you're gonna make a palette for fair to light skin, the person that's in charge of picking out the colors needs to have like a fair skin. If you're gonna make a palette for, medium to tan skin, then the person in charge of picking those colors needs to be somebody that has a medium to tan complexion. If you are going to create a palette for a deeper complexion, then somebody with a deeper complexion needs to be a part of that decision making, because I'm so confused by these palettes, and I'm so confused how they're labeled, right? Because I feel like, in my opinion, those who have a fair skin and those who have a deeper complexion none of these palettes are gonna work for you. Fair to Light palette, I'm so surprised they're calling this a Fair to Light palette, because this works for me. Like I said, out of all three of the palettes, this one is my favorite for my skin. So I don't know, you guys, I'm so confused by these palettes. Putting aside the color and how confused I am on these color stories, as far as the formula goes, fantastic. Fantastic. The bronzer is very, very beautiful, and it blends and melts right into the skin with no harsh lines. It doesn't get muddy. It doesn't get weird. Beautiful formula. On the two palettes that I used, obviously I can't speak to this palette because I didn't use this palette, but the two palettes, based on even swatching them, you guys, like these are super smooth to swatch and they have such a buttery texture to them. I mean, they just melt right into the skin. Overall, the quality is there, but you just have to decide if these are worth it in your collection. I have so many bronzers right now, so many blushes, so many highlighters. This is just not something that I need right now. I applaud them for making 3 palettes, but the colors that they chose for the 3 palettes is what's throwing me off. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Sound off down below in the comment section. I am so curious to hear your guys' thoughts. If you have a fair skin tone, do you think this bronzer is going to work for you? If you have a deeper complexion, do you feel like that bronzer is going to work for you in the dark palette? I am so curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this. So I hope that the review overall was helpful. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me in today's video. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys all in my next video. Love you. Bye.